Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talking TWAMPs. I'm your host, Ryan Walter, and we're going to be talking about the best president that we never had. I'm going to introduce the panel now, starting with the man to my right.
Hi, I'm William, junior at the College of William & Mary, government and economics, so a real twomp here, and excited to be here.
Okay, my name is Jacob. I am an international relations major, and I'm ready to go.
He's the man with the ear-shattering clap. That's what we're getting at here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Blake Phillips, and I am a government and German double major, and excited to be here like the rest of them.
And I am Joe. I am IR and Russian Studies, and I am extremely excited, ecstatic to be sitting at this table with you gentlemen today.
Joe, you gave them an identifying characteristic of where we were. We're at a table. They know that now.
A table can be metaphorical.
Okay.
We've been compromised.
And like I said earlier, my name is Ryan Walter, and I am a geology and history double major here at the college. All right, everyone, we're going to be talking about the the greatest president who we never had. Joe, you seem very opinionated on this already based off of our discussion beforehand. But Jacob, I'm going to start with you. Who's the best president that we never had?
Okay, I want to be clear. I don't know if this guy is the best president we never had. He's the one I'm most excited to talk about.
Okay.
That's completely fair.
Eugene V. Debs.
Oh my god, really?
Good pick.
I knew I would have an ally.
Extremely good
Joe.
pick.
Eugene V. Debs, for our listeners who don't know, was one of the first leaders of the American Socialist Party. He was imprisoned for protesting World War I. He ran for president from prison, actually, and that was the year that he, I believe, got the most votes. He ran a couple of different times, and just a really interesting guy. He started out in the Democratic Party, left for a couple of reasons, but largely because they were very racist at the time, as both major parties were. He was a labor activist. He was just a cool guy. Eugene V. Debs.
Listen, I will level with you. If America had a parliamentary system, he probably would have been the founding father of the American Labor Party, but this man should not have been president for a number of reasons.
List them.
First, the time that he would have ran for president, a labor movement president would not have been very effective, largely because there's no way that we would have been able to get, barring a parliamentary system, a labor-backed set of candidates into the legislature to back his legislation. If it would have been, at best, a very, very long, drawn-out system of probably the first set of shutdowns in American history, as the Congress, which did not have nearly enough of a labor-based constituency, fought the socialist president of the United States.
I'm not going through some alt history exercise here where I want to think about the parliamentary implications of Eugene V. Debs' presidency. I'm just saying that if... And
you call yourself an IR major.
If Eugene V. Debs had been elected, I think we can assume that there would have been some number of socialists elected into the House of Representatives and the Senate. Just to require the requirement that he would have to reach, to get the presidency. I'm saying that I think a Debs administration would have changed the path of American labor in the 20th and in the 21st century to something a lot better than what we've got now. I don't want to say the G word, but I think we would have a system much more like what Germany has. Blake's smiling. Blake, I'm bringing Blake around.
No, Blake's smiling because that's absolute hogwash.
William, who is the best president we ever had?
Okay, so mine's more of a should-have-won situation. This is going a little bit further back.
Do not steal my candidate.
I'm sorry.
Don't.
But from the election of 1852, knocking out Franklin Pierce for Winfield Scott.
We're good.
Oh, really? Winfield Scott?
Interesting pick.
Here's my reason.
Pick.
Winfield Scott, not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, let's. Who's Franklin Pierce first for our listeners who aren't that interested?
Franklin Pierce. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is he not the one who later joined the Know Nothing, or is that Fillmore? It went Pierce Fillmore, and they're both known for absolutely nothing.
Well, I don't remember if he did that too, but Franklin Pierce he's notable among American presidents as he was one of the few that was actually secessionist. So during the Civil War, he supported the Confederacy.
As did John Tyler.
Yes. There were a few of them, but he was one of them. And he was a president just before the Civil War. 1852 was the election. So this isn't a great thing because Pierce also did things like repealing the Missouri Compromise and really reignited the question of slavery as a political force in American politics. Winfield Scott, not a perfect guy. He was the one who actually enforced the Trail of Tears that was ordered by President Jackson. Certainly not a perfect...
Van Buren.
It was not signed till Van Buren. Yeah, that's true. But he was the one
clearing Jackson's name.
Clearing Jackson's name. Well,
why?
Why would you do that?
I'm just clearing the Trail of Tears thing. Just the Trail of Tears thing.
But Winfield Scott was distinctly not a secessionist and was more dubious on the question of slavery, so he might have kept the United States at least a little bit more stable. The question of slavery was probably going to end in violence no matter what happened, but I think Winfield Scott would have been a better president given the circumstances than Pierce, because Pierce really did nothing to stabilize the country. If anything, he made it less stable. Winfield Scott, not a perfect person, probably would have left the United States better off than he discovered it.
That is really interesting. We don't tend to think, when we're studying history, especially around the Civil War period, about the presidents that preceded, the outbreak of war and what they did to contribute to it.
Well, the only good one was Polk.
I mean, yeah, but
you pretty much universally agreed to be the only good pre-war president.
Well, but the bad presidents contribute too.
Yes, but in terms of like good presidents before the Civil War, after,
and Polk, arguably enough, contributed in his own way to what the Civil War would become by facilitating the conflicts that would train the generals to make the Civil War happen.
Yes, he did fight he did start the Mexican-American War, which
sort
of was a proxy war,
which was a travesty. I want a Mexican California.
And I want you to get
Joe
out of
wants
this.
a Russian California, and I want a California that desperately doesn't try to separate from our country every year.
All right, Blake, you seem to have had a. I like Winfield Scott, except for he failed to invade Canada, and that loses my respect.
What about the circle? We have to Ryan, you have to go next. Otherwise, it'll bother my sense of propriety.
All right, fine. I'll go.
What, Joe? Now you're letting them know where we're sitting.
Joe, what if there's a sniper right now?
Okay, let's see. I told the group before, but the best president we never had was easily Henry A. Wallace. And we would have gotten Henry A. Wallace.
This is not to be confused with
this is not George Wallace. This is not George Wallace.
Definitely not to be confused with
Henry A. Wallace. Okay, Henry A. Wallace was Franklin Roosevelt's
racist.
Was Franklin Roosevelt's vice president up until the 1944 nomination. And the reason he is not president for a variety of frankly, first and foremost, Roosevelt was known to be very sick and known to be ill going into the 1944 election. However, with World War II raging and all Franklin Roosevelt had done so far, there was no way that the party was going to abandon him, so they stuck behind him. However, they knew that they would basically have their choice of who was going to be the next president because they predicted FDR would die. So the party sort of oligarchs at the time, the Southern Democrats, sort of got together and picked Harry S. Truman. And Henry A. Wallace, on the day of the nomination, in the Democratic nomination, on the day of it, had the votes to win. And the Rockefellers and the party elites basically told I don't know what he's called, the guy with the gavel who declares things open and closed for voting. They told him that he was supposed to declare it closed, that they were not voting on that day. The order got mixed up. And then at the very end, one of them literally yelled at him, like saying, "You're supposed to close it." And he closed it while everyone else, except for those elites, thought that they were going to vote and Wallace was going to be it, and it was done. And then Truman, over the next 3 days of the convention, basically gets all the support as the elites bargain away separate things. And they did. And the reason that I think that, Wallace should have actually been our president, the reason I think he's the best president we never had, is because of a variety of different stances that he took. Joe will disagree with me on this because he did later in his life say that we should ally with Stalin in the USSR.
Later, in 46.
No, in 48.
In 46. In 46. He said that we should be conceding economic concessions out of World War II to the Soviets, that we ought to be giving them larger portions of Germany, which I will not stand for.
Okay, well, at home, Wallace was famous for championing ideas amongst the left. He was the reason that he wasn't liked by the party elites was because he was too left-wing. He believed in workers' rights, pensions, huge social revolution and upchange, equality for the races, equality for homosexuals. He was 40 years ahead of his time. And also, for Jacob to win him over on this one, he was the one who went down to South America and got the entirety of South America to fight in World War II with the rest of the Allies, providing supplies for the war effort and keeping that area unified before the United States later would go and mess that up.
Because Brazil without a navy and Germany without a navy were really going to do a lot of supply trading during World War II.
Brazil without a navy.
What are you
talking without
about?
a navy to
a huge portion of the
yeah,
supply,
but
a huge
them
portion of the
contributing
supplies
is
later in
important.
World War II came from
No,
South America.
I know, but what I'm
due
saying
to
is
Henry
that
A.
South
Wallace.
America didn't really have like an option.
Well, they could have stayed neutral, which is what they had been up until 1943, 1924.
Argentina, it's really interesting when you look at their decision-making during World War II. They were on basically the knife's edge whether they were going to... Well, because Perón, a lot of people thought was a fascist.
No, Argentina and Brazil both actually had negotiations with the Nazis to join their coalition. But really,
And I think Ryan's right. Henry Wallace played a really important role in that.
He was the pivotal figure
So
in
on
getting...
the one hand, Henry Wallace, who I agree with mostly except for the Stalin stuff, but Harry Truman's middle name is just the letter S, and that's really
and he's
cool.
also from Missouri.
But
that
that's
is a
what
negative.
that is.
You're
a
right.
negative.
I
That's
love
a
Henry
huge-
Wallace. I'm
Henry
sorry,
Wallace.
Blake.
he was by the president's, by FDR's side, championing social rights and labor rights for almost 10 years.
Listen,
and then
I'm
he's
not
just
saying
thrown
that
away.
Henry A. Wallace
Now,
wasn't robbed.
I
I'm
also
just
think
saying that
this
I don't know that we should have allied with the Soviets.
This isn't quite the topic, but the greatest man or the greatest person who was never president, really the question should be the greatest person who was never president twice, and that was definitely Jimmy Carter, but we're going to move on to Joe.
Jimmy Carter was not a great president. Great man, not a great
I
president.
think he would have been a great president. He would have. Fight me.
He would have been better than Reagan, certainly. But
Well,
that's
yeah,
a low
but anybody
bar.
would have been better than Reagan.
Except for George H.W., because that opened Pandora's box of Bushes.
I have to admit, I am a fan of Henry Wallace's domestic positions, and there was a time in my past, Ryan, where I would have agreed with you full-throatedly.
Full-heartedly.
Can you not ever say full-throatedly
Listen,
again?
and I will offer my own
what's the
full-throated
mixed
ascension to
what's
Full-heartedly, but hang on, wholeheartedly. But I also want to say,
Full-throatedly is
real
also
quick
a
before you
phrase.
go, sorry to interrupt you, you said earlier about Eugene Debs, he was too early in his time to have his positions and make real change. I think that Wallace was at the right time, the right person at the right time, and he was kicked out of a position that he could have done this country a lot of good.
And you're dead right, Ryan. I'm
So
also
what we really,
mad.
wait. So what the historical contingency that we should really be thinking about is FDR should have died 2 years earlier.
Well, yeah, but my real contention is not that. I think that I constantly bemoan the fact that we didn't set up our NHS equivalent after the war, that we didn't create the pension funds that Europe created after the war. And I think that Wallace probably would have made a viable push towards those programs. But, and I think this is key, the Soviet Union was only kept from expanding their sphere all the way through Germany by rather aggressive pushes by U.S. negotiators. And if we had not had somebody at the helm doing that, the Soviet Union if it still exists today, it definitely would have had a much more aggressive role to play in international politics, which would not have been a positive thing.
This is going after German sovereignty, which is not something I want to discuss.
I mean, I think when we're discussing Wallace's, desire to ally with the Soviet Union, we have to counterbalance it with the fact that the American presidency wasn't imperial in the post-World War II post-World War II period.
It was really close right on top of it, though. The president, the laws that were repealed in 47 that had empowered the president to make a lot of unilateral diplomatic actions were pretty broad.
And let's not forget that Truman's presidency played a vital role in getting America to take up the role of anti-communism. That before what we call the Truman Doctrine, right? There was a substantial isolationist faction who wanted us to like come back in like we did after World War I.
I should say that I wasn't being anti-Truman. I was just being
I understand.
pro-Wallace.
So
I think he got cheated out of it.
So yeah, look, like I said, I agree. Like I said, his domestic stuff was great, top notch. But I do think one of the most important roles of the president is on foreign policy, and that is why Wallace's naivety for those few years. Yeah, he went back on it. He wrote a pamphlet like called "I Think I Was Wrong" in 1952, where he got back on the bandwagon as far as the Soviet Union goes. But that was a critical point, and that's the reason why I can't support him. Though I do appreciate your argument.
All right, Joe, I think that makes it your turn.
That is a good segue, because the reason I chose the person I did has a lot to do with that argument. The person that I chose is a senator from a northern state that you may have heard of, who has served his state at a time when it was in transition, and did have that sort of interesting, somewhat unusual combination of those really left progressive ideas at home.
I was going to say some kind of joke like, is it Sherrod Brown? It's like,
combined with an extremely strong moral stance abroad.
We don't need his entire eHarmony profile. Just let us know. It's like,
I'm shaking in my boots. What is it?
Senator Henry Jackson of Washington.
Okay, that's an unusual name. I have no idea who this is.
Perhaps better known, you may know him as Scoop Jackson, which is what he was known as at the time. He was JFK's first pick for VP in the 1960 election, but people convinced him that he needed a Southerner to balance the ticket. He later ran again in 1972 and 1976, but didn't go very far. And anyway, the reason I like him is on the domestic front, he was much in the same way a progressive force. He wrote the U.S.'s first real environmental protection law before the EPA. He was, not that far ahead of his time as sort of Debs and Wallace both were, but he was a staunch progressive Democrat, strong for civil rights and all that.
Now, this all sounds great, Joe, but I'm running into the same problem I had with Ryan, which is that on the one hand, a progressive. On the other hand, we had a president with BJ in his name.
Well, that's true. But anyway, the second aspect of that is, in addition to all that, he was a strong interventionist overseas, very strong anti-communist, very much in favor of countering the Soviet Union on every front in a way that many liberals at the time, especially those who were as liberal as he was, were not quite in the same way. And this term has kind of gone out of fashion, but that sort of Cold War liberal moral interventionism combined with moral progressivism.
I don't know, but
they still call themselves Jackson Democrats.
Remember what the moral intervention of the period was? It was Vietnam. And Vietnam, which...
That's true.
Which, I don't know if you guys have seen The Post, but the movie that just came out. I mean, McNamara himself said there was nothing the U.S. military could have done short of dropping nuclear bombs up and down Vietnam.
Okay,
to
yeah.
win.
The reporter came out after.
No,
I'm so sick of Vietnam. However, they just should have invaded Cambodia.
I will talk about Vietnam.
Okay, wait, no, we have to deal with this.
No, we don't.
The invasion
No, we
of
do
Cambodia
not.
and Laos
We
wouldn't
don't,
have
though.
ended
We
the
don't
war.
have to talk about
McNamara
this.
himself said that.
We don't.
McNamara is the sole authority on whether
We
Vietnam
don't have to talk about this.
He had an enormous
We
study
fully
commission. The
do
whole
not talk about
All right,
this.
I guess
Look,
technically
look,
he's
look,
saying this,
so-
yeah, go on, Joe.
Jackson was a strong supporter of the Vietnam War. And I will freely admit that was a mistake, and that is a black stain on his record. However, I will say that the problem that we had in Vietnam was not the principle of interventionism, but the excessively narrow focus on anti-communism. And so that's what I will say there. And I will freely admit that, for a policy of moral interventionism to work to actually, in a moral way, you need really more discerning, less ideological people at the
Well,
forefront.
you have to deal with the Perones as well as the.
I think,
Exactly.
I think the blackest stain on his mark is apparently that he was a big fan of the Japanese internment camps.
Yes, but I mean, FDR made those, and he's still a great president.
No.
So
I agree, though. I did not know. I'd heard of Scoop Jackson before, but I'd never really been introduced to his policy. I think he would have been a very good president for the time. I agree with you, Joe. You are the only one who has presented a take thus far that I am fully on board with.
I'm honored.
You don't like Wallace? Why?
We've already had that.
Oh, it's just because
Blake,
of German
Blake
sovereignty.
has a hard-on for German sovereignty.
Against Winfield Scott.
All right, Winfield Scott failed to invade Canada. That's
And he doesn't like Debs because he's a spineless centrist.
Winfield Scott was definitely the better of the two evils in that particular situation.
I don't think Winfield Scott would have been strong enough to prevent the Civil War from happening.
I don't think he would have either.
I think it would have been another.
I think it would have.
I mean, I think
You're also
the real,
reaching way too far back for me to know. Really
I think it
what
would have
was
been
going on
the
at
real
time.
problem with talking about pre-Civil War presidents is literally there are no good choices.
I think it was
everyone
Taylor.
was bad.
Yeah.
I think he would have been another Taylor, where
He would have died on cherries.
he would have been swept into office on the fervor of his military background, but that ultimately he would have had a hard time governing.
It was either Taylor or Tyler. This is a slight tangent. Who spoke Mandarin in the White House because they thought they were being spied on. His wife and him.
I think it was Zachary Taylor.
Yeah, they could speak Mandarin, so they spoke Chinese in the White House. Okay, Blake. It's all been leading up to this. You're going to get the satisfaction of going last.
All right, so I'm about to get fully fought. Nobody, I will warrant, will back my choice here, but mine is by far the oldest candidate on any of our particular tickets. And Joe has noted from my screen who I am about to champion. But Henry Clay desperately should have won the presidency instead of Jackson on Jackson's second term. Henry Clay, for those of you who have since abandoned your American history knowledge, was perhaps the closest thing that we have ever come to as a true national centrist at his time. He.
Have you ever heard a grosser political term?
No, wait, listen. Why do you think we would disagree with this?
There has never been a good Whig president, and I don't think that Clay would have been that.
Well, now Clay was a Republican.
No, he's a
at the
Whig.
time.
He was a Whig and then a Republican, but he was a Whig at the
died
time.
before the Republican
No,
Party
he founded the Republican Party and then died.
Now, I do want to point out something that Blake might also be basing this on. Apparently, educated at our own College of William and Mary.
No, actually, it has little or nothing to do with that. Although
Well, I'm
that's
suddenly
a plus.
all into this guy. Let's go with it.
Henry Clay was the reason why, or a big part of the reason why Kentucky did not, I know he was dead by the time, but did not join the Confederacy because he influenced Kentucky politics for years and years and years to come. And was really a decently unifying force at the time of the Civil War, and I think would have been president far back enough that it might have been worth the policy effort to put a president like him in the office. He was also a practical abolitionist. I know that it's not a popular stance to take, that abolition would probably have been a hard thing to pull off without the war. But honestly, if it were to have been something to pull off without the war, it would have had to have been probably a slow process.
If you want to win Jacob over, all you have to read is this sentence, which was... Clay strongly criticized the subsequent Mexican-American War and sought the Whig presidential nomination.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't know why Blake thought I would oppose this.
And I think this is the most vehement reason that I like Henry Clay, especially for his timing. I hate Jackson.
Yeah.
Jackson was perhaps, in my opinion, if not the worst, then at least in the top 3 worst presidents in our history. And Henry Clay was one of the few forces that might have been able to unify the country.
Fair. I'm no huge
destruction
fan
wrought by
of Andrew Jackson, but with people like Buchanan, Fillmore, and Pierce, you're saying that Jackson was in the bottom 3?
Yeah.
What? How
Yes.
and why?
He had such long-term negative effects on things that we don't even think about because we can't think about them. Like had there been a national bank
The Bank of the US is huge.
to regulate the economy through the 1800s, had there been a major sedentary agrarian Cherokee population in Georgia, there's all these things that we can't even think about because Jackson up so badly. I fully agree with Blake. I mean, there was no socialist candidate on the ticket. Who else am I going to support? You know,
Daniel Webster.
Socialism hadn't really been fully fleshed out by the time Henry Clay was running, so...
I fully agree. Clay should have been president.
No, wait. When he was running, no, socialism had been theorized.
There was no socialist
So
party.
maybe
in the US.
if Marx's first draft they had sent
No,
straight across the ocean.
No,
right?
no. If Aeon, I have it right here. If Engels' conditions on the working class in England had been here, which it was, that was basically where he laid out.
What year was it published?
1847.
Yeah, no, he ran in 24.
According to the thing
That
we're
was
just
his
looking
last
at,
run in 48.
Well, yeah,
ran-
48
he
was
ran
his
a
last
lot.
run. He ran a couple of times, but 24 is the election that I'm talking about.
See, I think JQ.
So what we got to do here is what I'm hearing is inventing a time machine, going back in time. Okay.
Well, what I'm hearing is that the consensus is we need to elect more guys named Henry.
Yeah,
That's what we're coming down on, basically.
Are there any Henrys in the Democratic Party currently running?
I don't know.
There aren't any in the Republican either, though. We find a Henry.
And
We need to. Hey, listen. We start with Virginia because we got to rebuild Virginia politics from the
okay,
ground
all right.
up.
Jacob's bringing it back.
Find a Henry in Virginia, and we run him.
Famous Joe's got a
Go.
great
You
Google
could
search
go
now.
from governor of Virginia to president. I feel like that's a viable.
Yeah. Okay.
don't
Henry.
know, I think
and just so you know,
actually
hey, Jacob. Henry Kissinger can still run for president.
I would rather die. Henry Kissinger can choke
Can
to
he?
death.
I don't think he can.
Yes, he can. He was never president.
But he wasn't born here, I don't think.
I'm pretty sure Henry Kissinger was born here. Can you look up if Henry Kissinger was born here?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that actually.
The only Democrat named
Henry?
Henry.
No,
is,
he
like,
was
terrible.
born in Germany.
He was
yeah.
born in Germany.
Oh, okay.
Kissinger's from Germany.
He would have run. He would have run for president.
He this is the guy who donated to Republicans in the state. He's like
Well, what's his name?
Henry Cuellar or something. He's a centrist of the worst type.
Blake's favorite.
No, there are centrists that are bad.
Blake.
Yeah, Henry Kissinger's original name was Heinz. He was Heinz Alfred Kissinger.
Yeah, I mean,
I would rather die.
listen. All respect to Kissinger. He's a war criminal, and he should be tried for that.
But he was also our chancellor for a little while, so we got to balance that.
So we're coming around to. I feel like we've all had our takes. Only some of them were extremely wrong.
I'm hearing that Henry Clay would have been elected amongst us, which is good to hear.
Yeah.
I'd vote for him over
If
Jackson.
we had to choose between Jackson and Clay.
Well, if I had to choose between Jackson, Clay, and JQA, I would pick JQA every single time.
I'm a big fan of the fact that JQA went back to the Senate.
Oh yeah,
I think that was
JQA
kind of cool.
Was
And Clay is the reason that JQA got the presidency.
yes, because didn't he back him?
Well, he stumped him in Congress when the tie happened.
Right. Yeah, so I would vote JQA every single time. I like JQA and I liked the commitment he had.
Are
in
you
this country.
JQA all the way?
I am JQA all the way, and I'm really actually Carter all the way. I think Jimmy Carter's the best president we've ever had that we all forget about. No. No.
I don't know
I will
about
offer
that.
no evidence, but no.
I love Carter, but he was.
Listen, we've got time on this episode. I'll fight Carter.
Do we have time on this episode?
We've only been going for like 25 minutes. So
Yeah, wait, no. Let's make our last question.
No,
No
our last
fights.
question is single-term president who should have been elected to another term.
There aren't that many of those.
Okay, that's probably gonna be safe.
Okay, we got a limited choice. Let's
All right, rapid fire. All right.
Okay,
Blake,
play the here. We'll edit in the Jeopardy final question music.
outro. While you're doing the outro, we'll look it up.
Oh, I know what mine is.
I don't know what the outro is. I haven't done one
Yeah,
with the
what
outro
you do
ever.
basically is you just say, okay, I'll do it. It's like, I'm going to explain it on air and then go through it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Talking TWAMPs. We are an editorial podcast, so our opinions are our own and are not reflective of Catherine Rowe or the rest of the college. Additionally, if you would like to listen to any other podcasts, we highly recommend that you listen to any of them on the podcasting network at William & Mary. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts from. Just search Podcasting Network at W&M. Thank you, President Reevely, for letting us know that it has to be that ampersand. And you should be able to find them pretty easily. We've got a whole bunch, and they're on a variety of topics. So I highly recommend it.
Okay, can I start us off?
You can start us off, and Yeah, go ahead and start with it. If your person was shot or died before they could continue their next term, I'm going to count that as no. It has to be someone who
lost. Okay.
No, okay, there are only like 4 of those.
No, there are 8. No, sorry, 10. There are 10.
Okay, here, let me. Okay, because I was gonna say JFK, easy answer, but
there's a whole Stephen King
here,
novel about that.
It's the 22. It's
Yeah, the all of them. Okay, these guys all had 1 term. Then?
yeah.
Oof, I don't know that I like any of these guys. These guys all kind of suck. Oh no, you know what? William Howard Taft. I like Taft.
I'll weigh in on this a quick sec. I like Taft. I really like though that he also
That he was
served
on
as
the
Chief
Supreme
Justice.
Court? Yes, okay.
So I don't know that he needed to be president again.
Well, because who replaced Taft?
Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, I like Taft. I don't like Wilson that much. Hot take.
Well, yeah,
Go
'cause
ahead,
he was
William.
a vehement
Okay,
racist.
so
I know exactly who William is going to say. I don't
well,
even
yeah,
have to
because
look
you
at-
looked at my screen.
No, I didn't. I went like
okay.
this. My
Oh, I'm
prediction.
gonna kill you, William.
My-
I'm gonna go.
Wait,
feral right here
wait.
at this
Okay, can I make a
table.
prediction? Is it Bush?
Yes, it's
Yeah!
H.W. Bush. My reasoning for H.W. Bush is that he's perhaps been one of the most successful diplomats that the United States has had in quite a while, and I think he could have done really good work actually working with the collapsing
I'm
Soviet
gonna go
Union
hog
and
wild.
and the post-Soviet states to actually really bring them fully into kind of the more Western world and stabilize that entire region, which is something that I think that Clinton didn't do such a good job on, mostly because he got neutered later in his term because of the whole issues with the
of him
impeachment
being
one.
a serial sexual abuser.
That did not help.
William, I want to say I actually agree with you on this one, but only about his foreign policy. I think he did not have. I think he had horrible domestic policy, and what he did during the AIDS crisis is downright.
Yeah,
barbaric.
So there is that, but he's really struggled with his domestic policy, and that's just well documented. Even in his 1 term, he struggled with it badly. But on times, he was willing to do what was necessary, if not necessarily popular, for the betterment of the country. He had high deficit spending, so he instituted one of the greatest increases in taxes during peacetime in U.S. history.
Read my lips. All sorts of new taxes.
Yes, precisely. But it was necessary. He had to do it in order to help reduce the deficit spending of the country.
Listen, I'm not saying he was a bad president in terms of like what he was willing to do. I'm saying he was a bad president in terms of his active policy decisions.
But I also want to say that I agree with William is that, there are very few times in world history where you can point to it being like sort of a watershed moment, and from every single point forward, it's going to be different from that point onward. And I think that the collapse of the Soviet Union was that point, and I absolutely believe that Bush was one of the best, if not the most well-equipped person to handle it at the time, and I think did a reasonably good job at it, and then was kicked out of office.
I mean, that's where I'm at. Is like, yeah, he did a good job.
He ushered that could have gone so much worse.
But he was done. Like by the time he was elected out of office, that was it. We didn't need him to do that.
Blake
And
should
we
really
did
like
need
Bush
a
because
new
Bush
domestic
was, I think,
policy.
one of the main reasons there was a unified Germany.
No.
Yes.
Nope.
Yes, because he was he pushed exclusively for Germany to be unified and be a part of NATO.
But that's the thing, like, Germany didn't have to be pushed.
From what I remember,
No, it did not.
Yes, it did.
Well, no, but here's the
All
thing,
of
too.
my classes
Okay,
in
so
German have had to be on this.
No, I'm gonna disagree with you slightly here, Blake. The Chancellor of Germany at the time was super into German reunification. It was kind of his policy point, but Bush had to lean pretty heavily on France, who had to sign off on it to make it happen.
Okay, I will argue.
Bush contributed
we're getting
because
off track here.
France
Ryan,
had to...
who is your?
Well, I've already said it a couple times this episode, but I will say Jimmy Carter, probably for the opposite reason, but it's the flip side of the coin. I think he had an incredible energy domestic policy, and he was
Putting solar panels on the White House.
50 years ahead of his time in terms of
His
that.
domestic energy policy was fine.
He was also I honestly think that there was nothing he could have done given the economic situation he was handed and he found himself in with stagflation that could have actually fixed the economy.
That's
no,
not
it
at
was
all my
Nixon's
problem.
fault.
My
Yeah.
problem with Jimmy Carter is the fact that he was an anti-establishment candidate that ran anti-establishment, which is fine. Like, Reagan did the same thing. But he got to the White House and he kept that stance. And when you do that, you alienate all of Congress. And when you alienate all of Congress, you make passing legislation impossible. And when you make passing legislation impossible, you become Donald Trump. So it's...
Yes, but Donald Trump is, in my opinion, an evil antichrist, and Jimmy Carter tried to save the world.
You remember that bit where we said that the opinions of this podcast don't represent those of the college? Like, definitely. Take that in mind.
Just calling that
No,
back.
this is the official college stance, right? Reagan was the Antichrist, and he's going to rise again in 10 years.
Donald Trump and
Joe.
Reagan pursued policies that were horrible, and Carter tried to save the world from something that is going to kill us. That you will see. Your kids will see this, Blake. You will see this. And Jimmy Carter could have done more.
Joseph.
If he says Hoover, I'm killing him.
Just instant death.
Yeah, so they're all kind of to be honest.
They are all kind of shit.
Well, there's a
They
reason
lost
they
re-election.
didn't get
Okay,
re-election.
also,
yeah.
by the way, my second backup answer is JQA. I think JQA is great.
John Quincy Adams?
John Quincy Adams was awesome.
Alrighty.
But I guess of the choices that I have, I will say Gerald Ford.
Okay, interesting take.
For a few reasons. Firstly, because I've gone on the foreign policy warpath for a while, and he very much did sort of go on the same sort of way. He had a principled foreign policy, did reasonably well at the human rights issues, got us into the Helsinki Accords, all that good stuff. But I think more importantly, on the broader historical view, he was kind of the last of the moderate Republicans. His sort of view, his ideology was one that had the Republican Party maintained, we would not be in the polarized situation that we are today. And I think had he got his second term, had he been able to fend off the sort of Goldwater Reagan rise of like serious reactionary conservatism, the country would be in a significantly better place politically than it is today.
Solid take. I am going to, as I am often want to do, reach as far back into history as possible.
That's because we can't offer as much of a poised response because we don't have as much background information to work on.
Also, just because not a lot of the people who lost their second term...
Are you going to say John Adams?
I am going to say John Adams.
John Adams.
No, John Adams.
John Adams. If he could have been a fascist, he would have been. He was just too chicken to invent his own political ideology.
Well, I mean, yeah, but... that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Also, I'm kidding.
He fought a quasi-war with the French.
Yeah, which he should
for
have
no
done.
reason.
For no reason.
And used as an excuse to lock up the people who are criticizing
Okay,
him.
the
By
Alien
the way,
and Sedition Acts were bad. That's just true.
And that was the only thing he did.
I really just want John Adams to have gotten a second term so that Alexander Hamilton wouldn't have died and that the party would not have died with him. And as a result, Alexander Hamilton
Are
would
you
have been
saying
president.
you wanted a modern
Hot
Federalist
take.
Party?
Hamilton too.
No.
I don't know about
You
that.
only
I
like it because of the
Banks.
musical.
All right. We'll put this on the record right now. I ranted about Hamilton well before the musical came out.
No, you didn't.
I have to agree with Blake here. Hamilton living would have been a nice thing. Here's the thing is, I think Hamilton was probably enough of a to die anyway, so I don't know that Adams being elected would have saved him.
Nope, straight up, I have always been a Hamilton fan. You can go back to my high school history teacher, and he will tell you about how I never shut up.
I read that biography for like a class in like 6th or 7th
Chernow
grade.
one?
Yeah,
That one's freaking dry,
I know.
man. It
Wait,
goes
no.
on for a while.
Wait. What? If Adams had won, why would Burr not still have wanted to kill Hamilton? I don't understand what your logic is here.
Because Hamilton and Burr's situation had a lot to do with Burr's frustration over the vice presidency.
Now there's a president we should have gotten.
Because the musical does misinterpret it because it gives the impression that the election was what triggered it, but it was a ton of that went down during the
Yeah,
vice
It was
presidency.
the governor. It was about the Q ran for governor of New York, wasn't it? That actually prompted the duel. It wasn't about the vice
Well,
presidency.
and Hamilton campaigned against Burr in that campaign as well, but I don't know that Adams being elected would have made Hamilton not
I just
campaign
think
against
Adams was
Burr.
an
I don't think
idiot.
Hamilton would have become president, to be honest.
Well, either way, the party not dying is kind of my key.
What,
thing.
you want the Federalists to be
Yes,
alive?
yeah, I'm a big fan. Well, not
I-
now. They probably would have devolved anyway.
Into
but
the Whigs, and then we would have been in the exact same situation we were with Franklin Pierce.
I actually agree with Blake. I
Miller
think a
Fillmore.
strong Federalist Party would have made it easier to end abolition without having a civil war. Because you can have a federal government
Joe
that
looks
just...
peeved.
Hot take: that the Civil War happened, despite the costs, was a good thing and the best possible way to resolve the issue of slavery that we had.
I'm not even
and
talking
the
about
reason
Civil
things
War.
turned
I'm really
out
here about
poorly
the bank.
was because
He's
of
really here for the
Johnson.
banks, okay.
Was because it was Johnson's fault, and had Lincoln kept on Seward as his vice president,
Yeah.
things would have been.
No,
much,
listen, I'm with you,
much-
Joe, on the whole war thing.
I think avoiding the Civil War would not have been a positive.
No, I'm with
I
you.
thought Hannibal something was his first vice president.
That's fair. I think this is a good place to wrap up.
Yeah,
Now
thank
we've all
everyone.
shouted at each other.
Insert William outro now.
What? I already did it.
Yeah, I know you're gonna go.
Okay,
look at
that we can't use that clap though.